You know, for centuries, if you wanted to talk about the world power, you were talking about one civilization, Rome. We're going to dive into how this absolute superpower rose, what held it all together, and why its legacy is still shaping our world right now.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. 500 years. That is an absolutely staggering amount of time for any single power to rule the known world.
And the scale, wow, it was just mind-boggling. We're talking an empire stretching from chilly Britain all the way across Europe, down into the deserts of North Africa and the ancient cities of the Middle East. This wasn't just an empire, you know? It was its own world.
So, that brings us to the two big questions, right? How on earth did they build it? And what could possibly bring a superpower like that crashing down?
All right, to really get Rome, we've got to look under the hood at its engine. This wasn't just about brute force. It was this incredibly sophisticated political and military machine that just kept on chugging.
So, at its core, you had this really tense three-way power dynamic. You've got the emperor at the top, the absolute ruler. But he's got the Senate, this council of super wealthy elites whispering in his ear. And then there's the army. And this is crucial. The army wasn't just for defending borders. They were the kingmakers. They could, and they often did, decide who got to be emperor.
Of course, Rome wasn't the only big player on the block. Their main rival was the Persian Empire over in the east. And when you compare the two, you really see what made Rome, well, Rome. Persia was more about dynastic rule, built on agriculture. But Rome, it was this incredible melting pot, a multicultural, centralized state that ran on trade and a huge network of cities.
Okay, so we've talked about emperors and armies, but what about the millions of regular people? What was life actually like for the average person living inside this massive empire?
Well, Roman society was super rigid. Think of it like a steep pyramid. Way up at the tippy top, you've got the senators, the mega-rich landowners. Then you have the equites, kind of like the business class. And below them, the huge masses of ordinary folks. And right at the bottom, holding everything up, millions of slaves treated as property. And yeah, moving up that ladder was next to impossible.
So if you were a citizen back then, you absolutely wanted to be in a city. I mean, cities were the heart of the empire, and the perks were huge. If there was a food shortage, the grain went to the cities first. Plus, you got amazing public entertainment for free.
And what's the ultimate symbol of that? The Colosseum, of course. This is where you'd see gladiator games, chariot races, these massive, jaw-dropping spectacles. They were designed to keep the public happy and distracted from, any political troubles. It was brilliant, really, a marvel of engineering and social control all rolled into one.
And for about 200 years, this whole system worked beautifully. It was a time called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But then, in the 3rd century, the whole machine just started to sputter and break down. It led to a crisis that nearly ripped the empire apart for good.
So, this is the big question, right? If Rome was so powerful, so invincible, what in the world went wrong?
This number says it all. 25. That's how many different emperors Rome had in just 47 years. Can you imagine? Most of them were generals who grabbed power only to be killed a year or two later. It was complete and utter chaos.
And that political mess, that was just one part of a much bigger problem. At the exact same time, Rome was getting hammered by new invasions on its borders. All the constant civil wars were draining the bank, which led to a tanking economy and taxes that were just crushing people. It wasn't one thing going wrong, it was everything going wrong, all at once.
But here's the crazy part. Rome didn't fall. Not yet, anyway. The empire actually survived this crisis. But the Rome that came out the other side, it was a very different place. This was a time of massive transformation.
It really kicked off with a guy named Diocletian. He was a tough-as-nails military emperor, and he basically performed emergency surgery on the empire. He made some hard choices, like pulling back from territories they couldn't defend. He also reorganized the provinces to make them easier to protect, and this is a big one. He separated military and civilian power to try and stop generals from constantly trying to become emperor.
Then came Constantine, who built on what Diocletian started. He tackled the economic chaos by introducing a new, stable gold coin called the solidus. He beefed up the military, and in his most famous move, he shifted the empire's whole center of gravity by founding a new capital in the east, Constantinople.
But maybe the biggest change Constantine made had to do with religion. After centuries of Christians being persecuted, he made it legal, and it's wild how quickly things changed. Within just a few decades, Christianity went from this small, fringe sect to the official state religion. That fundamentally changed what it meant to be Roman.
So, these huge reforms by Diocletian and Constantine, they worked. They saved the empire and gave it another couple of centuries of life. But that split between the eastern and western parts of the empire would end up defining its final chapter and its unbelievable legacy.
Okay, so this is a really important point. When we talk about the fall of Rome, we're almost always just talking about the western half. It got weaker and weaker internally, got hit by wave after wave of Germanic invasions, and finally collapsed in the 5th century. But the Eastern Empire, the one based in Constantinople, it didn't just survive, it thrived for another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire.
Which brings us to a really interesting question to wrap things up. If half the empire kept going for another millennium, and its ideas pretty much shaped everything that came next, can we really say that Rome fell at all?
Perhaps it's better to think of it as a transformation. Because honestly, the echoes of Rome are everywhere you look. Our laws, our ideas about government, our architecture, so many of our languages, the spread of Christianity, it all has Roman DNA. The political entity might be gone, but its legacy is so deep inside our world that, in a way, it never really left.